Welcome. I'm JD Miller and excited to be your host for what I think is going to be a really insightful session with our friends at Radiant Logic. So let's be honest. Most organizations have poured a ton of time, money, and energy into identity security tools. But somehow identity-based attacks keep getting more common, not less. So what is going on? Well, that's the paradox we're here to unpack. It turns out the tools we rely on to protect us actually create gaps in visibility, gaps in data, and gaps that attackers are more than happy to exploit. We're going to discuss it's not just human users anymore. Machine identities are a growing part of the risk equation too. We're going to dig into why this is happening and more importantly, how to fix it. We're going to look at how a more data-centric approach using things like identity security posture management and identity threat detection and response can help you move from a reactive stance to one that's truly resilient. Joining me today are two experts who live and breathe this stuff, Sebastien and Wade with Radiant Logic. We're going to cover a lot, so let's dive on in. We often see organizations investing heavily in identity security, yet breaches continue at an alarming rate. What's behind this disconnect between investment and outcomes? Sebastien, let's start with you.
Yep. So, to your point, JD, we're definitely observing some kind of, like we're losing a war against cybercrime. And this is most probably because, and this is my definition of this identity security paradox, because for a long time being, we used to manage identity mostly on leveraging detections capabilities only. So I mean by that, managing identity lifecycle on one side and detecting threats. So actually threats undergoing, so identity breaches. At the end of the day, we were neglecting, I would say, the integrity of identity data on all of those preventative measures. So all preventative measures were mostly compliance driven, I would say. So we see it, on definitely, whenever I discuss with, customers or practitioners in the industry, we see that there is this kind of gap where 80% of investments are in detective measures and only 20% in preventative measures. So it's like, I would say, building a castle, based on foundation of sand. So, and moreover, despite those strong investment, what we observe is, I would say, tons of cybersecurity solutions deployed to tackle all those problems, everyone with their own, I would say, identity data silos. So we have this kind of, I would say, siloed views of those identities, which are leveraged by those hackers, which I would say they create identity visibility gaps, kind of, which are leveraged by hackers to, I would say, attack or breaches the identity ecosystem.
Wade?
So building on what Sebastien just said, and it's very insightful, I think we actually have real world examples. We see them every day where we have large customers, one we just worked with recently, who had invested heavily in intrusion detection, the ability to understand someone's inside my network, they're doing the wrong thing, I need to stop them. The barbarians are inside the gate. And that is a viable solution. You need to be able to react when someone is already inside the house. But what they discovered in a separate parallel analysis was that they had dozens and dozens of orphaned accounts that had no owners, had no human being attached to them anymore because the person had been terminated, had left the organization. All that access was still sitting there, unmonitored and unmanaged. It was being used by threat actors to actually penetrate the environment and do bad things to the organization, and unseen by the detection systems because it wasn't a breach coming in actively from the outside. It wasn't something those alarms and filters were seeing. It was somebody else in the organization quietly in the shadows operating without detection. And that's the challenge, is that when we secure the environment, we have to secure all the threats. And the current investment in a very strong perimeter detection method gives you a valuable piece of the puzzle, but it doesn't control or it doesn't alert for all the different possibilities that may come into play in that situation. The reality of it is that you will be breached. We used to say, when you are breached, but now it is a certainty that you will be breached. And basically, the reality is also that the windows are open, the doors are open, you have termites, you've already got internal systemic problems that are going to make that breach much more likely and potentially much more dangerous. It's the idea, basically, unfortunately, of spending a lot of money on detecting the horse has left the stable and then chasing after him, when we really need to invest on the other side. We need to invest in a better gate on the stable. We need to make sure the horse is happier and doesn't want to leave. We need to make sure that internally we handle all the other components that contribute to how bad a breach can be once that breach has actually happened. Or can I even prevent that breach from ever happening? If I take away the fuel from the engines these threat attackers use to gain access and to compromise the system, can I starve them for what they need to be able to be successful? And that's an area that we think the investment needs to be shifted over to, where we can actually start to manage that. The other component that Sebastien touched on was that we have these siloed platforms that we're using today. We've invested a lot in internal management. We have single sign-on access management platforms that really check your credentials, give you multi-factor authentication, make sure you're doing the right things. We have governance platforms and privileged account management systems. But in many situations, they're working in their own little island. They may even be using different data to make the decision about the same person because their source of data was something they went and retrieved themselves. They integrated themselves, and there's no common set of information that everyone's working on. So if everyone has different answers to the test, everyone's going to get a different result, and not everyone's going to be on the same page. The challenge here is that this system has to work together to be effective, because the threat actors only have to be right once. They only have to find one gap in one seam in the system. And if we don't bring everything together in a holistic approach, we're really opening ourselves up to that vulnerability.
You mentioned an identity visibility gap in your analysis. Could you explain what this is and why it poses such a significant threat to organizations, Sebastien?
Yeah, as highlighted by Wade, I think, he made the point here. This identity visibility gap is just because we're kind of lacking this single, accurate, I would say, even real-time view across all the entire identity landscape. So at the end of the day, it should cover both human identities, machine identities, non-human identities in general. And at the end of the day, this is a super complex problem to solve. Definitely, this is mostly because, I would say, identity and access management system have not been built with this complex distributed environment in mind. So they're still very siloed, So you have dedicated system for every single silos, I would say. So at the end of the day, this identity visibility gap is a huge problem because, threat actors do not need to breach your security system anymore. I would say, as Wade highlighted just before, they just need to exploit inconsistencies, I would say, in identity itself. So this is a typical, reactivated dormant lever account scenario where you have some unmanaged accounts on the edges of your identity landscape, which are leveraged by attackers to breach all your defenses. So this is all about this identity visibility gap.
Wait.
So I think it's an excellent call out, because the challenge really lies exactly there. Our premise is that if you don't address this visibility gap, then you really are working blind. And unfortunately, the threat actors today have tools and capabilities to search your own network and find these gaps for you. Unfortunately, they don't tell you about them and let you fix them. They exploit them within your system. And this is even a bigger problem when you start talking about non-human accounts or machine accounts, service accounts. Because with a human account, if I get my account compromised, there's a potential that I'm going to stumble across the fact that my account's acting differently. I'm going to alert my security department. I'm going to be, noticing this particular account. And I have a limited amount of privileges that are very tightly audited by our platform. My access is reviewed. I've got least privilege assignments. I've done a lot of things technologically to make sure the users are pretty tightened down. On the service account side, it's the Wild West. it really is an unmanaged environment. And there actually is even a conference session or organizational group this year at Identiverse that's calling out the idea of non-human identities being a major threat. Multiple layers of challenge there. One, they're not ones that people necessarily see on a daily basis. These are the ghost accounts that operate in the background. They're the ghosts in the machine. So they can operate autonomously without being noticed, without being actually visible in a lot of situations. They're also the gears that run the system, so they have more access than the average user. These are systems accounts that make the financial applications able to go to the databases and gather the data they need. That's massive access in a single account. And because they're unmanaged, they're often left behind. That an account or a system may have been sunset. The service accounts are sitting out there. I worked with one organization where they created a service account for the DevOps team who did a lot of internal application development. That was a test account that they could use to test their applications. They gave that account to every production application in the organization. So this one account had access to everything in the organization that ran on a service. So what do? Well, you have to start treating these like human accounts. You have to start auditing and looking for these systems. You have to start digging these accounts out of the platform and managing them in the same way that you're managing human accounts today. And then we have on top of that what's coming down the road, which is AI-driven bots or non-human AI accounts that won't only be able to operate at a higher level in the shadows, they'll operate with intelligence. They may do things you can't even understand. So now we have to bring a bigger, more powerful set of tools to bear on that particular problem. One example I'll point out is that there was a major breach in 2023. I looked it up a minute ago because I didn't realize how fast time had flown. It's been 2 years already. At a casino in Las Vegas that probably most everybody heard about. The bad operators on that system got onto the network and were able to operate in the shadows for 30 days and sat there and gathered credentials off the wire unseen by the intrusion detection system because they were not an anomaly. They were just regular service accounts doing regular service account things, and there was nothing there to say what they were doing was odd. Once they had gathered so much critical information they could collapse the whole platform, they acted, and they acted in a major way. So that's the threat, is this visibility gap really creates tremendous amounts of downside, and it is a major problem to solve, but it is definitely one that needs to be addressed.
You highlight machine identities as a particular area of concern. What specific risks do these non-human identities pose that many security leaders might be overlooking? Sebastien?
Yep. So, I mean, machine identities is definitely a big concern. I mean, they are just multiplying 3 to 5 times at the rate of human identities. I mean, to Wade's point, you have service account, you have all those DevOps, I mean, legacy service account, I would say, all those DevOps practices, and more recently, generative AI on artificial intelligence, which brings more and more accounts to the table. Most of them are mostly dynamic. Interestingly, I mean, the industry, I would say, realized lately that they have to be managed as well. So we took care of human identities a lot on a kind of left those service account on the side, just managing the account password per se, but not really what you can do with them. So said differently, life cycle of machine identities was left on the side. It's interesting because if you go back to human identities with the GML processes, joiner, mover, leaver process, we still see a lot of non-human identities still active. Also, they are not used anymore. I mean, they're kind of stalled account, orphan accounts. There's some kind of a lack of data quality or data cleanup. Same thing for the way that they connect. I mean, this is less the case now, but for a long time being, we've seen, those kind of lack of password policies applied to the service of machine identities. When you actually correlate this with the fact that most of the time they are kind of overprivileged. They have tons of privileges, and there is no access management or not even visibility, I would say, on those machine identities, on who can access to or leverage those machine identities. the biggest threat, I would say, is that they're often used as, I would say, a tool in order to do lateral movements within the industry, I mean, within the companies, often undetected. This is the typical casino issue that Wade explained. I mean, they are definitely leveraged, as some kind of a very, very nice tool to defeat companies' defenses.
Wait.
There's actually, there's a ton of examples out there because we're finding out more and more now as we talk to more of our customers, as we shine the light in this area. It's a bit of a horror story because all the skeletons are coming out of the closet. We had one organization we worked with recently. They had a financial platform. Everyone has a financial platform. You run your company on your financials. And they had diligently worked to lock that down. They had minimum privileges for everyone that could use it. They had access reviews on a regular basis. They'd done segregation of duty implementations to make sure that people couldn't misuse the system. It was pristine. It was their pride and joy. Except that a audit of service accounts found that there was a admin account on the server that was hosting the financial services application that had full access to all files on the server. So basically, there was this back door you could drive a Mack truck through that had access to every single file on the financial system. So if you had that admin account rights, or you found that as an intruder and you compromised it, because you would be able to do a lot of things to that account undetected, you now had the financial system. So the level of effort they had put in was just overwhelming to secure this. But that one little crack in the back was all someone needed to compromise the whole platform. And that's the nature of our challenge here. Again, as I repeat the concept, we only have, the tracker only has to be right once. We have to be right every time. We have to close every seam and every door. And that starts with visibility. That's why focusing on service accounts is critical. But that comes with its own set of challenges. An organization, again, that we worked with recently and did a full services account audit, we ran into an initial challenge, which was, how do you identify a non-human account? There was not a naming convention. There wasn't a NH put in front of every account that was non-human. There wasn't any even kind of pattern that you could look at to say that these were service accounts and these were admin accounts and these were other bot accounts. But by working backwards, we realized that they'd done a great job of managing the human accounts, and all those had a very definite naming convention associated with them. So by filtering out all the humans, we assumed everything left was a machine account. But once you have a machine account, then you have to go ahead and filter out what kind of machine account is it. Is it an admin account? Is it a service account? Is it an AI service account that's running an AI in the background? Is it something with an API platform? What is that account doing? And so there is an additional layer of context that has to be added to that. What applications is that account accessing? Can I look at that whole entitlement chain for that account and analyze it that way? Can I see what permissions it has? Can I see what endpoints it's actually being accessed by? Can I go through the logs and integrate that data in? So there's a lot of information that's brought together and correlated to create what we call context, because you need context to identify these particular systems, especially when they're not tied to a human. Because I have a role in the organization, my context is pretty obvious, what I do at Radiant Logic. A service account, it takes a lot more work to build that context around it, and that's critical to identifying these. And then being able to make the right decisions. Do I turn these off? Do I let this one operate? Do I tighten this one up? Do I watch this one? And the fact that we're not putting all these into a privileged account management type of model is kind of concerning, because these are the most privileged accounts in most situations in the organization, and the most vulnerable ones, they need to be managed as actively as a human account is being managed.
It's hard to have any conversation without the letters AI coming in. So current AI applications in identity security primarily focus on anomaly detection. Sebastien, how do you envision AI evolving to address the deeper identity data quality issues?
Oh, wow. Oh, okay, so we can speak for hours on this
right?
one.
Get comfortable.
I would say, as an introduction, I would say, I mean, let's just envision AI as much more than just an LLM engine. Okay, so let's envision AI as a practice. Having said that, what we've seen so far is AI has mostly been used in identity security for, I would say, detective measures. So mostly for advanced pattern matching for anomalies, those kind of baselining analysis in order to identify that people are, for instance, connecting, suddenly over the night to some critical system. So it raises an alert. I mean, we have a lot more expectations on AI, and definitely the AI, I would say, promise is much more than that. It's all about data, because at the end of the day, AI, I would say, promises lies in what I would call the relationship mapping. So said differently, understanding and building out this context that way just introduced on building all the connections between all those elements, those identities, permissions, accounts, critical assets across all the identity ecosystem. So in order to identify, everything from, do you have similar critical roles accessed by different people? Those kind of, I would say, privilege accumulation over time, which at some point, triggers something which I would say is strange, or correlating identity data with vulnerability scan to identify attack paths, potential attack paths. So this is really all about the story. It's kind of, I would say, in order to make the most of the data, you need to have to make the most of artificial intelligence. You have to feed artificial intelligence with data in order to understand this context on all those relationships. So it's all about data. And at the end of the day, I would say if you feed artificial intelligence with the right data elements, the way I envision the future really is an artificial intelligence who will help you to proactively map, all your high identity attack surface, flag all, I would say, the right relationships and the discrepancies in order to suggest remediation and be proactive. So really, mitigating the risk before those risks are being leveraged by attackers.
Wade?
It is an open question as to what AI will do. And we have, again, as Sebastien said, we have grand hopes for the capability. I think, as you mentioned, a lot of it has to do with how we train our AIs. There's a common scenario out there, people I think are familiar with, called a AI hallucination, where an AI comes back with an answer that is completely false, but it has all the confidence in the world because it analyzed the data and it's certain that's the right solution. And that goes back to the quality of the data you're feeding your AI to start with. So AI has a lot of ways it connects into the identity infrastructure. The first one is, if I'm training my AI, just like something as simple as role mining, I'm going to determine what access everybody has in the organization to be able to then predict what access people should have and make sure they don't have too much. That's a wonderful idea, and it's a great process if you have good access to good data about what roles people have. But if the data is garbage, you're going to create garbage out of that analysis system. You're going to create roles that don't make any sense. You're going to give everyone access that Betty has. Betty's been here for 24 years. She has access to everything. So that's reasonable. Role number one, everybody gets everything. So you really have to inform this system with good quality data. So that goes back to cleaning up the information you're feeding the AI platform itself. But the hope is, as Sebastien says, if you can add context to this model, if you can actually get the AI to start thinking in multidimensional relationships, which it's very good at when it's well-trained and well-fed, then you can do some amazing things. One of the scenarios that I have in my head that I share as a soon hopefully available one is, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting on this in the SOC. I get an alert saying an IP address from the Korean Peninsula is coming in. It's spoofing our CEO's credentials and is trying to get access to the general ledger of our financial reporting system. Well, that's an easy heck no. That red button, that's not going to happen. Except that if I add context to that, well, 2 o'clock in the morning in Korea is 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the Pacific West Coast. 2 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast is 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Korea. The IP address is actually the office of our subsidiary in South Korea. Our CEO's travel records show me that he is actually in South Korea on a business trip, and it is the Sunday, or actually now Monday in Korea, of the end of the reporting cycle for the financial market, and he has to get the reports in and sign those off in order to meet Wall Street requirements. If I hit that red button and block him, I may be looking for a job. So I need to know all this additional information so I can make a much more informed decision. That's what's in front of us. That's what is possible. These engines can reach that level of correlation. Or another simple model is I have a user in the organization that is has their account added to an admin group. And I notice that in the platform, and I recognize that as something that is a normal provisioning activity that has been added to that admin group. But if I can look different at the context of that, I can realize that change wasn't made by the provisioning platform. It was made manually by someone else with admin rights. So that's out of band. That's not an authorized normal transaction. So now I can potentially proactively reverse that particular action in real time and stop that escalation from happening, because I can recognize in the moment that although it is a normal thing to have happen in the organization, it didn't happen in the right context, in the right way. So now it's something I can pack out of the system. So there's a lot to do with that integration. One of the metaphors I'll give you, and this is sort of interesting to understand, or very personal for most people, when you interact with another human being, when you interact with somebody in the office, you walk up to somebody you recognize, you bring with that conversation a ton of context already. You know who they are, you know their role in the organization, you know your relationship with them, you know the last 3 things you guys talked about doing. As soon as they start to give you information, you understand whether it's something new, it's an extension of something you've already done, are you going to need additional resources? Your mind starts adding on to the context of this interaction immediately. We do this without thinking. This is the way our mind works. AIs are at the very beginning of being able to do this kind of association. But again, because they can operate so quickly, the potential for them to add that much context gives us the ability now to use that power to defend ourselves, to clean our environment, to make good decisions. Because unfortunately, on the other side, the bad operators are also using AI to ask the same questions about our network. You know, where can I find an anomaly? Where can I find something that's a pattern that I can follow? How can I stay in the shadows? That same context that they're trying to reach to be hidden is the context we need to understand to find them.
I love that, because AI is 100% confident in results that are 50% accurate a lot of times, right?
Yes. That's like me. I'm the same person.
It is a powerful tool. You all advocate for a combined arms approach to identity security. So, Sebastien, what would this look like in practice for an organization trying to rebalance their security investments?
So combined harm is a battlefield term, you know. So I mean, long story short, it takes a village to win a battle. So applying this to the identity landscape means that, and especially on the risk side, means that you do not need to deploy detective measure only anymore. So you need to deploy both preventative measure and detective measure. So this has been highlighted actually by the NIST cybersecurity framework, so the NIST CSF framework. And more recently, we finally had terms. So those are no longer trigrams, those are quadrigrams, kind of. Well, I mean, we have new terms here. So high-SPM on one hand, which is high identity security posture management, and ITDR for high identity threat detection and response, which is all about prevention for high-SPM and detection for detective measures. I mean, ITDR, sorry. So one would say, okay, a combining arm approach will be to deploy both. I mean, preventative and detective. So ISPM plus ITDR. I would say something is missing here. I mean, if you're closely following us, still the beginning of the journey of this conversation, something is missing. Definitely, this is a data piece. So I would say the combining arm approach is not just those 2 elements. Those are 3. It's real-time identity data lake, so really this kind of unified identity, single source of truth of all those identity and accesses in the identity ecosystem, and then ISPM and ITDR, in order to have those both systems fueled with the same consistent and enriched identity data elements in order to identify both proactively and through detective measures that the situation is still in control. Therefore, I would say reducing the attack surface with ISPM proactively and mitigating threats as long as they appear in the identity landscape.
Wait.
That's an excellent explanation of that. Really, it's a three-legged stool that you have to have. And we keep pointing back to the identity data being a critical component. The data has to be correct. But inherently, we have tremendous amounts of built up IT debt in our organizations. Our identity data is not correct. Not only is it siloed potentially, not only is it misinterpreted by different platforms, but initially that data at rest, those sources of truth are not necessarily accurate. So part of the cycle of this process, the ISPM model, when you include the data layer as part of that security posture, you have to go in and execute identity data hygiene. You have to go in and clean the data. You have to go through and detect where there's missing information. Who doesn't have a manager? Because if you don't have a manager, because he left, I'm not going to get my access reviewed because there's no one to review it. So I'm not going to show up on any of the reports. So I'm not going to have anybody monitoring what I'm doing. Or what groups don't have valid descriptions or owners. So if I have an issue with that group when I'm doing my forensics or I'm building my context, I have no idea what that group does or who to go to find out what there is about that group I need to know. So there's all these potential gaps in the data. But then there's bad data. There's actually, I used to be in the marketing department, but now I'm in sales. So you're acting with your automated platforms on me as if I'm a marketing person and authorizing my marketing access, but I'm actually over here doing sales activities. That disconnect can be very dangerous, especially again, if I'm a threat to the organization because I've been compromised. So you're not seeing who I am when you're managing me. So I have to be able to fill in that data and make it accurate. Building up those sources of truth, gathering them from the whole enterprise, because it's a 360-degree view of the user. That travel information is critical. We have companies now, a very large airline that's using training data that we pull in from training systems to inform authorization for maintenance mechanics to work on jets as to whether or not they're trained to do aileron maintenance on a 747 or not. And if they aren't, they're not going to get the access to the logs and the ability to go onto that system and work on that plane. So they can actually, in the moment, verify qualifications of someone to do a job on something as complex as maintaining an aircraft. So this is all very critical information to bring into play and to build into that context. But it is sometimes very difficult to get your head around how big this really model is. And I like to use the metaphor of a home. So if we look at our home as an area where we want to increase the quality of life, I want to be as comfortable in my home as possible. It's my castle. I invest money and time in making it more and more comfortable for me and my family. Well, if I'm concerned about my perimeter security, I'm going to put in an alarm system and a ring camera on the front door, and I'm going to know if there's an intruder at my front door. My RTDR system is going to tell me if someone's trying to break into my house, because that's a big level of comfort for me. I'm not happy if I can't be relaxed. But if I've got a great perimeter control system, but my roof leaks and I'm getting water dripping on my head when I'm sleeping, my quality of life is bad. So it's not necessarily an intrusion detection issue. It's a quality of life issue. There's an issue with the data coming out of my roof that's affecting me and my quality of life. Or my house isn't as big as it needs to be. I need to expand my infrastructure to add more functionality to my home. I need to have more bathrooms and more bedrooms for my kids. That in itself brings on a whole bunch of other components that are in play. I've got to make sure the foundation is actually stable before I start adding onto the house. But then I've got electrical to take care of. I've got plumbing to do. I've got to do certain things before others. I've got to paint the walls before I put the carpet down. This is all analogous to what we do in identity. I've got single sign-on platforms. I've got governance systems. I've got privileged account management. I have zero trust platforms. They all need to stand on the same foundation, but they all have functions they do. Those functions all need to work together in a way for me to have the quality of life I'm looking for. My home has to be everything working equally. So there's a whole challenge here of going into an existing customer and saying, how do we lift up all these different areas with the same goal of giving you this quality of life, giving you this security posture that actually makes you safer. And that's part of what we address when we talk about actually dealing with this particular scenario.
Wonderful. I got a stat here. So by 2027, you predict major market correction in identity security as organizations realize their detection heavy approaches resisting risk, I should say. So talk to me here, Sebastien. What early
Oh,
signs of this shift are you seeing?
it's really based on observations. I mean, those are things that we just observed. I mean, we observed, I would say, perhaps three major elements here. So one is what we see is more and more companies are recognizing identity data as a critical infrastructure. So you have people really, dedicated or devoted to manage identity data per se. So this is no longer just a requirement for cybersecurity solutions. This is more some kind of an horizontal layer that we have in the company. Second is definitely, I mean, we see this. I mean, and definitely this will most probably be a hot topic in Identiverse. I mean, ISPM is gaining traction. So we see a more balanced approach between detective control, ITDR per se, I would say, and security posture management. So this is a more balanced approach that we are observing. So companies are paying more and more attention in identity hygiene, in security posture management. This is what we observe. And third, this is perhaps something which is more from the analyst side or analyst perspective, I would say. I mean, analysts themselves, such as Gartner, predict that there is some kind of a convergence, I would say, between identity security and some other areas, such as data security platform, for instance. So this is kind of, I would say, a closing the gap approach, where identity security becomes more and more closer to a traditional GRC or risk management posture. Therefore, I would say eliminates all those boundaries which have been leveraged by hackers or attackers during all those years.
Wait.
So I think we're seeing a repeating pattern. I've been at this, you can tell from the gray hair, for quite a number of decades. And in IT and in technology, we go through a cycle. And we have early adopters. We have people on what we used to call the bleeding edge, that are companies that actually get out there and they look for the latest thing. They're trying actively to solve every problem they can as proactively as possible, and they're taking a bet on technology that's new. And we saw this 4 or 5 years ago with organizations we were dealing with, because we offer a very large integrated identity data platform, coming to us and saying, I need a single source of truth. I need a entitlement catalog. I need one place to go to get all my identity data and know that data is accurate, it's truthful, it's coming from the right locations. It may not be the source of that data, but it's aggregated information from sources of truth, and I vetted it. Because I need to make decisions on that data. Everything else I do is built on that. And they recognized that platform. They started building that out. We're seeing that now become more of a mainstream conversation. We're seeing it more and more at conferences and presentations, where people are realizing that, hey, everything I do relies on this fuel of identity data, and I need to be able to make sure that I have the right data. And I'm doing the same work 5 different times, integrating 5 different silos back to all my data sources. Why don't I pull this all together and make something usable? The other key benefit here is that if you have the data in one place, you have one place to go and audit, you have one place to go and manage, you have one place to do your data hygiene and cleanup, and one place to watch for potentially intrusion detection. Identity data is an attack surface. It is what the intruders are going after, because if they can compromise the data, they can compromise the access, they can gain access to the system. So we're seeing that now actively being something that people are organizationally trying to defend. So you have to look at 2 things. One, is the data quality good? 2, can I secure the data? Do I have it in a place where I know that it's not being altered? Because this feeds both decisions I'm making today, all the policies in my zero trust engine, which are now becoming more mainstream, Every time I authorize someone through a zero trust architecture, I'm going back to the identity data and saying, does this user's attributes, group memberships, roles map to this policy to give them access to this resource? If the answer is yes, he's got access. That data is the key. If I alter that data, I alter the outcome of that policy. No one's going to know that I made that change and violated the policy because the data was in line with the policy itself. So I have to make sure the data is secure, clean, and then secure. Also, this is the same data feeding my AI. So if there's a lot of talk out there now about AI corruption, where a bad operator gets on your network, he doesn't worry about anything but going and finding out what are you feeding your AI with, because if I alter that information, I get the AI to do something differently, which maybe is open the back door for me because it thinks I'm a friendly, because I altered the data it knows to be the sources of truth. So I have to secure that data for that purpose also. So this is becoming a much more important piece of it. But then we're getting a higher level of visibility also, that C-level organizations and even the board now is aware of identity. We used to be the redheaded stepchild. We were underfunded and forgotten. We were in the basement turning the crank every day that kept the lights on, but nobody really knew who we were until something broke. Now we're an open point of conversation. We're a budget, we're a line item, we're something that's being focused on, and we're rolling up dashboards now to C-level folks, CISOs, CIOs, that are telling them about the quality of their data. This is the cleanup effort that's being done to eliminate orphaned accounts, which is decreasing your risk profile. This is the progress we've made in the last 30 days. There's KPIs out there now at the C-level that are built around hygiene and cleanup and the ability to make this information secure and available. So it's a real shift now in both visibility, budget, and understanding.
I'm going to put you on the spot then. Start, Sebastien. How do you implement this?
Oh, it's not as simple as just deploying a product. I mean, it's not a product thing. It's not even a project in my opinion. It's some kind of a multi-year program that you need to embrace in order to move forward. So most probably my advice will be to go through some kind of a security maturity model or security maturity level assessment in order to better understand where you are, where are your weaknesses and blind spots, in order then to find a path to increase, your maturity level. There are already numerous, a lot of security maturity model assessment available in the market. Interestingly, they're kind of all lacking this data or identity data piece. And really, you will be most probably very disappointed if you consider that identity data is something which is just part, of, I would say, an ISPM product, for instance. It deserves its own layer. Or perhaps say differently, security posture management embraces all these identity data elements. So identity security posture management becomes itself this journey or this practice where you have to go through those maturity level.
Wade?
So it's, as Sebastien said, it's a journey. And I think this is a wonderful transition we've made as an industry. Starting with Zero Trust about 3 or 4 years ago, we started admitting to customers that there's not one product, there's not one project that's going to solve all your problems. A lot of platforms over the last 20 years were sold on, this is the last identity management platform you'll ever need to buy. It's going to solve all your problems. And it'll roll out in 3 weeks, don't worry. It is a journey. It is a process. It's just like the home model. You don't remodel your whole house in a weekend. It is a process of bringing in architects and doing designs and getting engineers and discussing all the different, I just did a bathroom or a kitchen remodel and I'm just getting the handles for my cabinets now. There's a million decisions to make. It's an elephant, but you can eat an elephant. If you eat an elephant one bite at a time, but you also need to plan how you're going to eat that elephant. You can't go around with a scattershot model of doing a little bit here and a little bit there and putting out fires. You're not making any progress in that model. You have to step back and invest in this journey. And the key with that is starting to know, where are you starting from? Again, that analysis of readiness analysis or maturity model. Where are you in each of the different silos of your identity infrastructure? Privileged account, access management, governance, zero trust, threat detection. what level of maturity do you have in each of those areas, and which ones are most critical to moving you into a more secure model? Because you're going to adjust each of these particular areas. You're going to see, well, I've got a really good PAM platform in place, but it's using really siloed data. So I really need to get my PAM platform integrated into my master data set, my core identity sources of truth from that common data platform. And then my PAM platform inherently is going to be more effective and better. So that's my number one focus. Let's look at that as my low-hanging fruit. And then what's the next thing I need to take a look at? Well, I've got a great authentication authorization platform, and I'm doing all this work through Intra and Okta to authenticate all my applications. Wonderful. Do you have two-factor authentication on everything? I have no idea. I think I do. I told everybody, but I can't tell you if they're using it. Great. We need to get in there and get visibility on that, because we need to lift that up, because that's another low-hanging piece of fruit. So as you start to build these blocks together, you're raising the level of the organization. And it's going to be a little bit uneven as you start, because it is a journey. But the intent is to continuously raise each area up as you increase the security in those particular platforms. So you need to start with the inventorying your identities, find out where your data is. That's the key to work with. Figure out where your data silos are. Make sure everyone's using the same information, especially as you start to roll out zero trust. You're going to start rolling out dozens of different policy decision points, different zero trust endpoints that will decide who gets on the network, where they can go on the network, what applications they can access, what database data out of the particular tables in a database can they access based on policy. All those front ends need to point back to a centralized identity store. If you don't, you're going to create anomalies within your system that will be easily exploited by bad actors. And then I need a roadmap. I need to sit down with my trusted advisors. I need to sit down with my team. I need to sit down with the whole group. It's business, it's architects, it's the people that run the operations, it's the C-level organization that says, we're going to go from Los Angeles to New York. We're putting the whole family in the family station wagon. We're on our way. Well, you're going to get about 1 tank of gas out of town before the whole plan falls apart if you don't think about what you're doing. And this is where you plan this out. You map this out. Things are going to change. Technology is going to evolve, but having a flexible platform that you're building on then gives you the ability to adapt as you go forward.
Wade, I want to stay with you. For organizations convinced by this approach, what are the first steps towards implementing a core data-centric identity security strategy?
The first step is really recognizing identity is the foundation for everything you're doing. Anything else you start to build, as Sebastien mentioned earlier, you're building a castle on sand. You need to come back and address the IT debt that you have in the organization. You need to identify your sources of truth for identity. It may be different sources for different attributes in the same user profile. HR may be authoritative for what department I'm in. AD may be authoritative for my role. The training system may be authoritative for other data. So I need to understand the nature of all the places I've scattered the identity data, and what's truthful, to bring that together and build that foundational layer and get that in place. I also need to get everyone on the same page, because it's a village. You've got to have everyone working in the same direction. It's a team effort. And this takes buy-in from the top. If you don't have C-level buy-in, if you don't have an authoritative mandate from the top down, then you're going to be a person toiling in the middle, trying to fix the world and putting it all on your shoulders and not be able to get anything done, because the scope is too big for one project, for one person, for one effort. You really have to generate a company-wide understanding that this is a monumental challenge, but it is one that has to be taken. We have to climb this mountain, because if we don't, our businesses are at risk. As I said earlier, you are going to be breached. You've got termites in the walls. If you ignore that problem, you're going to be on the front pages of the newspaper, or you're going to lose access. And it used to be that people were attacking organizations to get identity data to sell it on the black market. That was the big cash payoff. Everyone's identity data is already on the black market. That ship has sailed. They're coming in now to actually ransomware your environment. They will shut you down and kill your business to get cash out of you. The amount of money you will spend trying to recover from a bad breach is a decimal of what you will invest to fix the problem. It's insurance, and it's always hard to sell, but you have to go upstairs and sell that, because this is critical. We have to get insurance. We're going to need this effort, this project completed. We have to get this ball rolling. Because the bad actors out there are getting stronger tools. They recognize AI. They're using it already to the point where someone as technically illiterate as I apparently can go into a set of prompts and identify organization, set up an AI with a bunch of requests, and it will go ahead and generate all the code and all the attack methodology to go try to get into that organization and compromise everything. And it'll do magical things to get me what I need without me even knowing how it happened. And I'm the bad guy. So I don't have to be a savant in a basement somewhere coding away, in assembly to compromise an environment. I just have to have ill intent. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that out there in the world. We have to be ready.
Wonderful. Great stuff, gentlemen. And give me your final thoughts for today. And also, what are you looking forward to most at Identiverse? And Sebastien, I'll start with you.
Yep. Final thought is, this can both be seen as a challenge or an opportunity for every identity and access management leader or CISOs. But let's see the opportunity here, okay? So, let's say that if you recognize that identity security has a data problem, if you treat identity data as some kind of a critical foundation for your effective security, and if you adopt a more balanced approach, preventative and detective, definitely, there are tons of low-hanging fruits here. You will reduce your attack surface, and you will increase the effectiveness of all your existing siloed cybersecurity investment. So this is definitely a huge stake that you have. And speaking of Identiverse, I definitely super excited for this event. I love this event, just for you to know. And I would love to see, I would say, how the identity practitioner and identity security industry embracing more proactive, I would say, preventative security measures. So I will definitely have a look at all the booths, all the stands. Looking for the trends on this and expecting a lot on identity data on security posture management.
Wade.
I'm going to echo Sebastian's love of Identiverse. I've been to hundreds of conferences. Literally, I've got a wall here of all my lanyards hanging on a hook, and it's the size of a Christmas tree. But this is the one where real practitioners come together to try and find real solutions to real problems. It's not a theoretical conference. It's I have an issue, I need to get it addressed. I need to understand where I need to be the next 2 years from now. And this is a great group to be with because these are really brilliant people. Some of the best technologies in the industry are brought together and some of the biggest challenges are presented and addressed. You see real customers talking about real solutions that they're implementing. And you also see patterns. A couple of years ago, a large portion of the booths were passwordless authentication. It was the buzzword. Everybody wanted to get off of using passwords finally after 10 years. But then a year later, there's 2 of the 15 left because the market consolidates. It finds a winner. It moves on to the next thing. Where it's like headlines. We have an attention span. Right now, I'm really excited because our bread and butter, the thing we do best, identity data, is getting its time in the sunshine. We're seeing a real resurgence now of organizations that are building on top of identity data. Unfortunately, and I think for us, fortunately, a lot of them still assume that identity data is pristine, it's universally available, and it's always going to be there. I don't have to worry about that. It's just a given. It's table stakes. I'm going to build functionality on top of that. Well, that's great, but that's not the world we live in. The world we live in is you've got to deal with that identity data layer first. And this is what Radiant Logic can do. It can bring that functionality to the table. Whatever you're building on top of it, you've got to start with a strong foundation. And so I'm really interested to see what amazing things are going to be built on top of what we have available.
Wonderful. Wade, Sebastien, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.